David Whitfield built 3 businesses before he understood why 2 of them failed. The interesting part is which one succeeded. It wasn't the business with the best product. It wasn't even the one he believed in the most. The one he'd stayed up until 2 a.m. perfecting. The one he told his wife about with real excitement in his voice. It was the one he almost didn't start. The one that felt, if he's honest, a little embarrassing. 6 weeks of work, no branding, no launch party. He expected to abandon it within a month. By the time he understood why that business worked and the other 2 didn't, he had already burned 4 years and nearly his entire savings chasing something that looked exactly like success right up until it wasn't. What if almost everything you've been told about starting a business is backwards? Why do some founders work 80-hour weeks for a decade and still feel behind, while others build something small, forgettable, and never need to work again? The answer has almost nothing to do with working harder. Hold that question. Your answer is probably wrong. Not because you're not smart, because this part almost never gets taught. Business schools skip it. YouTube gurus skip it because it doesn't sell a course. It's not exciting enough for a thumbnail, but it's the single biggest difference between the people who get rich building businesses and the people who just get tired building them. By the end of this, you're not walking away with motivation. You're walking away with something more useful, a filter, a way to look at any business idea, yours, a friend's, some strangers on TikTok, and know within 30 seconds whether it's a business or a trap wearing a business costume. To get there, you need to see what happened to David. David Whitfield was 34, married, 2 kids, living just outside Columbus, Ohio. He worked in logistics for a mid-sized shipping company, a steady desk job, a steady paycheck, a commute he could drive with his eyes half closed. Nothing was wrong with his life. Nothing was exciting about it either. He wasn't lazy. He read the books, listened to the podcasts on his drive home, one earbud in so he could still hear his kids in the back seat. He had 11 half-finished ideas sitting in a Google Doc labeled Someday, the way a lot of people do. His first real attempt was a coffee brand. He loved coffee, genuinely, not performatively. On Saturday mornings, he'd roast beans in the garage while his kids watched cartoons inside, and he could talk for 20 minutes about the difference between an Ethiopian bean and a Guatemalan one without taking a breath. So when he finally decided to build something, coffee felt obvious. Passionate people build passionate businesses. That was the assumption. Nobody had ever told him otherwise. He spent 8 months on it. Branding, packaging, a slick website, a logo he paid a designer $400 for. He launched with the kind of nervous excitement that keeps you checking your phone every 10 minutes. Friends bought bags, family bought bags, and for about 6 weeks, it genuinely felt like something was happening. Orders coming in, a few strangers finding the page, that first taste of, this could actually work. Then the friends stopped buying. The family stopped buying. And David was left staring at a spreadsheet late one night, laptop glow the only light in the kitchen, that told him something he didn't want to hear. He was spending more on beans, packaging, and ads than he was making back. Every sale was roughly break-even, sometimes a loss. He wasn't running a business. He was running an expensive hobby that occasionally paid him back in compliments. David wouldn't understand why for months. He assumed the problem was execution. Better packaging, a bigger ad budget, a smarter launch, never suspecting the problem was the shape of the business itself. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, nearly half of new businesses don't survive 5 years. But that's not the statistic that should worry you. Many of the businesses that survive never make their founders financially free. They simply exist, year after year, keeping their owners busy without ever changing their lives. David's coffee brand didn't collapse in one dramatic moment. It just slowly ran out of oxygen. And that's worse in its own way, because there's no clean point where you're allowed to quit. You just keep bleeding a little every month, telling yourself it's about to turn a corner. There's a name for what kept him going long after the numbers had answered the question. Psychologists call it the sunk cost fallacy. The more time, money, and identity you pour into something, the harder it becomes to walk away, even once walking away is obviously correct. David wasn't stuck because the business was working. He was stuck because quitting felt like admitting the 8 months and the garage full of roasting equipment had been for nothing. That feeling, not the spreadsheet, is what keeps most failing businesses alive 2 years longer than they should be. The spreadsheet doesn't lie. The ego does. This is where David learned the first lesson, and it's the one that quietly wrecks more first businesses than any other idea in modern entrepreneurship. Passion is not a business model. It feels true that loving something means you should build a company around it, but passion only tells you what you enjoy. It says nothing about whether strangers will pay for it, often enough, at a high enough price to keep the lights on. David loved coffee. Strangers did not need David's coffee. They already had a shop on their corner, a bag from Costco, a subscription from a brand with $10 million of marketing behind it. His passion wasn't an edge. It was a blind spot that let him ignore the math for 8 straight months. This is where almost every entrepreneur gets it wrong, and it's not where you'd expect. After the coffee brand went quiet, David didn't stop. Something in him refused to. The strange thing was that the failure hadn't made him want to give up on business. It had made him obsessed with figuring out exactly where he'd gone wrong. So he did something most people skip entirely. He stopped consuming motivational content and started reading autopsies. Not stories about Apple or Amazon. Those are almost useless when you're starting from a garage in a spreadsheet. He wanted to know why small businesses actually died, the ones closer to his size, his risk, his stakes. Patterns started to surface. The businesses that died all shared one trait. Every sale required a brand new stranger to notice them, get convinced, and buy. And that stranger, more often than not, never came back. Economists call this one-time revenue, but the real cost isn't in the term. It's in the body. It shows up as exhaustion that doesn't register on a spreadsheet. The specific tiredness of a founder still hustling exactly as hard in year 3 as they did on day 1. Because the business never builds any momentum underneath them. Every month starts back at 0. The businesses that survived did the opposite. They found a way to get paid again and again by the same people without having to re-win them from scratch every single time. This is where David had his first real shift in thinking, and it's one most people watching this have never fully sat with. Recurring revenue isn't just more money, it's less fear. Think about what happens inside a founder's mind when they know 40 customers are paying them again next month. Whether or not they post on Instagram that week. That founder sleeps differently, decides differently. There's a specific desperation that ruins first businesses. It makes you drop your prices, chase every lead regardless of fit, say yes to clients you already sense are trouble. Recurring revenue, more than anything else, is an anxiety removal machine wearing a business model's clothes. David didn't have that. He had a coffee bag people bought once, and maybe, if he was lucky, bought again in 6 weeks when they ran out. No compounding, no momentum. Just a treadmill with better packaging. So he asked himself a question that ended up redirecting the rest of his life. What if the product mattered far less than he assumed, and the structure underneath it mattered more? But this wasn't the biggest mistake he'd been making. That question led him somewhere he never expected to look. Pressure washing. David got fixated for a few weeks on a subject with nothing to do with coffee. Not because he suddenly loved pressure washing. He'd never touched one in his life. The fixation started over his own fence on a Sunday evening with a neighbor named Russ, who mentioned in passing that he was making more from his small pressure washing side business than David made at his full-time logistics job, working maybe 15 hours a week doing it. David assumed Russ was exaggerating, the way people often do about side hustles over a fence. So he asked to see the numbers. Russ pulled up a spreadsheet on his phone with the same casualness he'd used to show off a fantasy football roster. The business was embarrassingly simple. Russ washed driveways, siding, and fences for homeowners across 3 zip codes. No app, no brand, a Facebook page with photos that looked rushed because they had been. But here's the detail that stopped David cold. Nearly 60% of Russ's revenue came from repeat customers on a seasonal schedule. The same houses, twice a year, booked because Russ texted them 2 weeks ahead, and they replied, yes, same as last time. Russ hadn't built a coffee brand. He'd built a machine that quietly asked people for money on a schedule, and people said yes without needing to be convinced. This is where David learned lesson 2, and it's the one that separates founders who compound wealth from founders who just stay endlessly busy. Boring businesses compound, exciting businesses exhaust. There's a psychological bias doing most of the damage here, and once you see it, you can't unsee it, sometimes called the operational aesthetics bias, the tendency to believe something is a good idea because it looks impressive, not because it performs. A slick coffee brand with beautiful packaging feels like a real business. Washing someone's driveway feels like manual labor, the kind of work you'd be embarrassed to mention at a dinner party. But feelings don't run spreadsheets. One of those made money. One of those made Instagram posts. David started noticing the pattern everywhere once he knew to look for it. The dry cleaner 2 blocks from his old office had been open for 18 years. Unremarkable, quietly profitable because people need clean shirts every week forever, and once you find a dry cleaner you trust, you rarely bother switching. Meanwhile, a trendy acai bowl shop that opened with a 2-hour line on day 1 closed within 14 months. Attention isn't demand. That line wasn't proof people needed acai bowls. It was proof people were curious exactly once. Curiosity spends money one time, need spends money forever. This became David's second filter, and maybe the single most useful sentence in this entire story. Before starting anything, ask whether you're building something people are curious about or something people actually need on a repeating basis. Curiosity businesses need constant fuel, ads, virality, hype, a founder who's always on, always performing. Necessity businesses run themselves because the customer returns without being chased down. David wasn't going to become a pressure washer. That's not where this goes. What matters is what he did with the pattern once he saw it clearly. He took a colder look at his own skills, not his passions, his actual skills, and asked a question with less romance in it than any he'd asked before. What do people need repeatedly that I'm genuinely capable of providing reliably, where I could build trust instead of chasing attention? Through his logistics job, David had spent 9 years absorbing something most people never think twice about: how small businesses mess up their shipping and fulfillment. He'd sat in on calls where companies overpaid for shipping without realizing it, lost money on returns they didn't fully understand. He knew this terrain intimately without ever calling it valuable. So instead of building another product business, David built something nobody would put on a vision board: a small consulting service helping local e-commerce sellers fix their shipping and fulfillment costs, billed as a flat monthly retainer. No exciting unboxing, no cool packaging, just a monthly invoice attached to ongoing value. Here's the number that should stop you mid-scroll. Within 14 months, that unglamorous consulting business was earning more than the coffee brand ever earned across its entire 8-month life, while David worked fewer hours to make it happen. Why? Because it had every ingredient the coffee brand never did: recurring revenue, a real ongoing need instead of a passing want, low acquisition cost since his first few clients referred him to others in their circle, and, the piece almost nobody talks about, high margins because his product wasn't physical inventory that could spoil or sit unsold in the garage. It was knowledge, delivered monthly, paid monthly. Before that shift went any deeper, David stumbled onto a story that made him feel a little sick to his stomach. It was about Sam Walton, decades before Walmart became the giant everyone recognizes today. Walton didn't invent the discount store or low prices. Dozens of small retailers were already doing that in the 1950s and 60s, chasing the same customers David had once chased with his coffee bags, one sale at a time, hoping the next stranger walked through the door. What Walton did differently was distribution. He obsessed over getting products into small towns cheaper and faster than anyone else, using trucking routes and warehouse placement most competitors dismissed as boring back-office work, not real strategy. While other retailers argued about which products were trendiest, Walton solved the unglamorous question of how things move. Distribution matters more than product. It's one of the most repeated lines in business history, and almost nobody applies it, because product feels like the fun part and distribution feels like homework nobody assigned. David saw an uncomfortable reflection of himself in that story. He'd spent 8 months perfecting a blend nobody had asked to be perfected, while ignoring the harder question of how he'd reach people who needed what he made again and again without paying for their attention every time. Russ had barely thought about his product at all. Pressure washing is pressure washing. What Russ had built was a distribution system wearing the disguise of a text message, a repeatable way to reach the same customers on a predictable schedule without spending a dollar re-earning their trust. That system was worth more than any amount of product polish. A common mistake happens right about here. People assume that because their idea looks nothing like David's or nothing like Russ's, none of this applies to them. But the filter was never about coffee, pressure washing, or shipping consulting specifically. It's a structure that keeps showing up across unrelated industries: restaurants, software, landscaping, dental practices, marketing agencies, dog walking. The product on the surface changes every time. The skeleton underneath a business that survives 20 years instead of 2 almost never does. What happened next surprised even David. There was one more shift ahead, the deepest one. The one he didn't understand until roughly 2 years into the consulting business, sitting across a desk from his accountant on a gray November afternoon. The accountant said something that rearranged his entire mental model in about 11 words. You didn't build a business. You built yourself a really good job. David didn't understand at first. The business was profitable. It had recurring revenue. It had margin. What was the accountant even talking about? Then the accountant asked one question David couldn't answer. If you disappeared for 3 months, would this business still make money? It wouldn't. Every client relationship ran through David personally. Every strategy call, every recommendation, every invoice required him, specifically sitting in the room. He hadn't escaped the treadmill from the coffee days. He'd just built a nicer, better paying one with a view. This is the trap that swallows more successful looking founders than any outright failure will, because it doesn't feel like a trap while you're inside it. It feels like winning. You're making real money, you're your own boss, nobody's telling you what to do, but you're not free. You've simply traded a manager for a client list that owns your calendar the same way a boss once did, just with better branding on the invoice. Most founders build jobs, not businesses. And the line between the two isn't revenue, or passion, or even margin. It's whether the business can survive and keep operating without the founder standing inside it every single day, answering every phone call, making every judgment call personally. That distinction is the real reason some entrepreneurs work harder every year of their working lives, while others build something once, systemize it, hire around it, and step back, ending up wealthier while doing dramatically less. It isn't luck. It's a structural decision made early, usually invisible to the person making it, about whether they're building a machine or an unusually demanding job with nicer branding. David spent the following year rebuilding, not the business itself, but the structure holding it up. He documented his process carefully enough that someone else could run client calls without him in the room. He hired a junior consultant and trained him on the framework he'd assembled through years of trial, error, and late nights. He turned his personal judgment into something written down and repeatable instead of something living only inside his own head. It was slower than doing the work himself, and for months it felt like he was making the business worse because his own hands were on fewer of the details. Then something happened that told him he'd finally built the real thing. He took a 2-week vacation, his first in 6 years, and fully disconnected. Phone in a drawer, no laptop in the suitcase. He came back expecting a mess. Instead, he found the business hadn't just survived without him. It had grown. Not because he was replaceable, but because he'd finally built something that didn't need his constant presence to function. That was the moment David stopped being an employee of his own company and became something closer to an owner of a system. By this point, David had stopped asking, "How do I make more money this month?" and started asking, "What would this look like if I disappeared for a year?" That single question changes how you build everything underneath it. This is the actual difference between the people who spend their whole lives trying to earn more and the people who end up wealthy without seeming to work nearly as hard for it. It was never really about finding the perfect business idea. It was never about the trendiest niche or the most passionate pursuit or even the smartest product. It was about whether the thing you build asks for your presence every single day just to survive, or whether it can stand on its own while you're somewhere else entirely, on vacation, at your kid's soccer game, asleep. So here's the filter this whole story was building toward. Next time you look at a business idea, yours or anyone else's, ask 4 questions in this order. Does it get paid once, or does it get paid again and again by the same people? Is it solving something people are curious about, or something people actually need on a repeating basis? What are the real margins, not the flattering headline revenue number? And the hardest question of all, if the founder vanished for 3 months, would it still make money? Most ideas fail that filter immediately. That's not a discouraging outcome. It's the entire point. It means you just saved yourself 4 years of what David went through, with a garage full of coffee beans nobody wanted a second bag of. Run your own idea through it, not the version you're excited about, the real one with actual numbers attached. If it fails a question, that doesn't mean throw it out. It means you know exactly which piece to fix before spending $1. Maybe the delivery is one time when it should be recurring, so you build a membership or retainer instead of a single transaction. Maybe the margins are thin because you're competing on price in a crowded market, so you specialize into a narrower corner where you can charge what the work is worth. Maybe the entire thing runs through you personally, so you start documenting the judgment calls that could eventually live in someone else's hands. Here's the part nobody tells beginners. The filter isn't a test you pass once and forget. It's something you keep running year after year on the very same business, because businesses drift. A recurring revenue business can slide back into one-time transactions if you stop nurturing renewals. A high-margin business can erode if costs creep upward unnoticed. A system can slide back into a job if you get pulled into every decision because it's faster than training someone else to make it. David still runs this filter on his own company today, 3 years later, because he watched it save him once, and nearly ignored the warning signs a second time, once he got comfortable. That's the real reason some founders work harder every single year, while others build something once and eventually step back. It was never about who worked hardest in year one. Almost everyone works hard in year one. It's about who kept asking these 4 questions in year 3, year 5, year 10, and who got comfortable, stopped asking, and let their business quietly slide back into being a demanding job wearing a better title. Most people spend their lives trying to earn more money. The ones who actually get free spend their lives building something that doesn't need to ask their permission every Monday morning. If this video gave you even one idea you didn't have 20 minutes ago, don't let it disappear. Write it in the comments before you click away. I genuinely like to read it. And if you're interested in building wealth through better thinking, not louder thinking, subscribe. We'll keep learning together.